Today, we're going to be getting into probably one of the most controversial and contentious points that I cover in my recent book, Pedogate Primer. And that's the case of the McMartin Preschool, which kind of kicked off the Satanic Panic Scare of the 80s. Depending on where you stand, that was either a massive witch hunt or something of a well-organized cover-up. But we're going to be looking through that today, and this is just the beginning on this subject. By the way, I'd like to also talk about Kenneth Lanning of the FBI and his place in this whole thing. But let's start right here with Professor Ross E. Chait. This is from his blog at Brown University, Ivy League institution. And he's talking about the McMartin Preschool case. This, by the way, was published shortly after the New York Times Retro Report, which I mentioned in the book, and tried to debunk some of the points there. Now, one of the main things here, Debbie Nathan literally quotes that Judy Johnson, one of the mothers of the kids, of one of the kids at McMartin, was, quote, psychotic. And also the fact she goes on and on about how, how ridiculous it was. These kids were talking about tunnels and there were no tunnels. And, the New York Times, you'd think they'd have some fact checkers, but I guess when it comes to something like the McMartin case and the Satanic Panic in general, it's gotten to a point where you don't have to debunk it anymore. Just saying, oh, that's widely discredited. Well, I mean, lots of things were widely discredited until we found otherwise. The coelacanth, we thought it was extinct for millions of years, and then one washed up on a beach. Nobody's ever seen a giant squid alive, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. So just because something's widely discredited does not necessarily mean that it's been debunked. And I think that may be the case with McMartin. Now, Judy Johnson, as it says here, she died of alcohol poisoning in 1986, or at least that's what they finally ruled. Initially, I find this odd too. Initially, they, it was inconclusive. They didn't know what, caused her sudden death right before she was about to be a witness in the case. Another one of the things that is often brought up by the people who are debunking the McMartin case and the Satanic Panic in general is how few children went on the stand. Now, okay, number one, a lot of the kids were either too young or they were too old, as in, they were too young to go on the stand, or they were too old, as in, the statute of limitations had run up already. So, pointing to the number of kids that were put on the stand, especially when you consider how these poor kids were treated by the defense team. They were absolutely ruthless. It was a form of re-victimization, possibly. Allegedly, of course, seeing as the Buckeys were found not guilty after 2 trials anyways. But yeah, as it says here at the Brown University blog post, Retro Report also disposed of the extensive medical evidence in the McMartin case, with a single claim that there was no definitive evidence, definitive evidence. But defense lawyers Danny Davis allowed that the genital injuries on one girl were, quote, serious and convincing. And so his argument to the jury was that the girl who was involved in both of the McMartin trials, because there were two after the first one, which was the longest, most expensive trial in U.S. history, they had to have a second case. This girl was outside the statute of limitations, so the signs of her sexual abuse that were proved by a pediatrician, quote, to a medical certainty, couldn't be entered into the record. And so since it wasn't entered into the record, then New York Times' retro report is able to say, no kids were abused. There were no signs of abuse, when that is absolutely 100% not the case. There's so much more to this. One of the things that I find really interesting relates to the UCLA professor of archaeology, Gary Stickle, PhD. And Stickle was hired by some of the parents of the children. And interestingly enough, Stickle was on the Buckey's side. He believed that the parents, like a lot of people, he thought that the parents, were full of it. He just took the job so that he could prove the parents wrong. He did eventually change his tune once he saw that there were indeed tunnels. That's another one of the things that, by the way, in the retro report and other Debbie Nathan's book and all these situations where they use McMartin as the prototypical case, and we've debunked this, and all the other ones are fake too. But there are so many odd little things, like the fact that Paul Bynum, the former police officer turned private investigator, Bynum, by the way, was basically kicked off the force. They thought he was paranoid because he was too interested in this case. Apparently, the day he was supposed to testify in the McMartin trial, one of the jurors was their homes. One of the jurors' homes was burglarized, so they weren't able to have court proceedings that day. Bynum, by the way, said that neither side was going to like what he had to say, and apparently he had some kind of missing papers related to police investigation that for some reason ended up in Raymond Buckey, one of the men, one of the main suspects in the McMartin molestation case. Somehow he ended up with these police investigative papers. There's no reason for that. So yeah, there's at least a heavy shadow of doubt regarding certain parties in the case. Another question I have: why did Peggy McMartin lie about being a recent employee, despite her name being on payroll records going back years? That, speaking of easily debunked, there were records showing that she'd been there for years, that the place has got her name on it, for goodness sake. Another thing is, the fact that, some of the folks involved in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which was, of course, I've got a whole chapter on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation in Pedogate Primer. They were a mixture of CIA-funded psychiatrists who worked with MKUltra, professionals in various fields, most of whom were parents accused of abusing their own or other children, and, at least one very vocal pedophile activist, literally vocal. He was the founder of Victims of Child Abuse Laws, VOCAL, vocal. And he lobbied to do away with mandatory reporting laws in the state of Florida. Um, he was one of the stars of the FMSF, and hundreds and hundreds, literally hundreds of cases. He was an expert witness who was propped up by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. He by the way, claimed that 2/3 of child abuse cases are invalid, and of the, just absolutely fake. The kids are lying, and 2/3 of the ones that were real didn't hurt the kids or were actually beneficial. Yes, he said that. This is the guy who is an expert witness in hundreds of child abuse trials. A guy who thinks that child abuse is good for kids. A guy that thinks that molestation is just, usually the kids are lying, and when they aren't lying, it was good for them. So, anyways, I'm not gonna go in deep on the Kenneth Lanning stuff right now. FBI behavioral science unit, and later worked with missing and exploited kids. He and Colonel Michael Aquino, who was a Satanist, former LaVeyan Satanist, who founded the occult order, the Temple of Set. Colonel Aquino was also involved in military psyops. He was involved in the Presidio case, another one of the cases where, there were kids with literal physical signs of sexual abuse, but nothing came of it. Also, there's the fact that, the Presidio burned down, so any evidence that could have been there disappeared. When the military, because it was on a military base, when the military investigated it, they found that it was an accidental fire, though the ATF disagreed. The ATF said it looked like arson. Anyways, like I said, it all really goes back to McMartin, though. This whole satanic panic. And, another thing that's interesting to me about the satanic panic and the McMartin case is the use of straw mans, right? You pick apart a couple of different things. Oh, there's these crazy fundamentalist Christians who thought that karate and Dungeons and Dragons would make you possessed by demons, and that's silly, and so, they conflate that with these possible cases of, abuse at Presidio, McMartin, several other cases. The website for the American Psychological Association, by the way, reprinted an article from the journal Developmental Psychology regarding the, quote, counterintuitive phenomenon of higher levels of false memory in older children, adolescents, and adults than in younger children. Yes, that's right. As it turns out, multiple studies suggest that younger children are less suggestive, less likely to be led into false memories. In 2012, the journal Developmental Review went into the situation of how, quote, children are more prone to false memory reports than adults, and hence their testimony is less reliable than adults. And then goes into the fact that actually fuzzy trace theory predicted reversals of this standard developmental pattern in circumstances that are directly relevant to testimony because they involve using the gist of experience to remember events. And that ellipsis points, and that other things being equal, juries should regard adults' testimonies as necessarily more faithful to actual events is untenable. So, in other words, there's multiple studies that the idea, and it became a very popular idea. Salon, Dave Futrell, male feminist, wrote for Salon and a couple other places about how, children were too often believed in these abuse cases. he's written some other slightly suspect things too. That kind of makes me wonder why he's glommed onto the male feminist. Uh, perhaps to make himself, virtue signaling as a means of hiding some darker predilections. I don't know. I won't get into that, but I will at least mention that in correspondence with Mr. Futrell, he did apologize for his earlier opinions and says that he finds it regrettable that he made those statements. um, Now, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, by the way, they defended Woody Allen when he was accused of molesting his I think she was 6 years old at the time, Dylan Farrow. They defended Woody Allen. They defended Jerry Sandusky. They defended Jerry Sandusky. So it's like these guys really, really, like, even in cases where overwhelmingly the evidence supports the fact that this person is a child molester, a pedophile, and they have hurt one or multiple children, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation seem to really, really like to kind of, stand up for these kind of things. Another thing, the Satanic Panic is now kind of held up as this case of the media witch hunt, and I do believe that it did in some ways start out as a media witch hunt, especially as far as trying to connect Dungeons and Dragons. If your kids play it, they'll murder their parents. Heavy metal music. If you play it backwards, you'll kill yourself. I don't know. Maybe some, I think in some very suggestible cases, sure, that kind of thing could happen, but it's not statistically significant. It's the same as the idea that Columbine was caused by Marilyn Manson and violent video games. No, I don't believe that violent video games and Marilyn Manson are responsible for mass shootings and that kind of thing. So yeah, in a way, it did start out as a media witch hunt, trained on metalheads and D&D and all this kind of thing, and that really played into the hands of the people like the False Media Syndrome Foundation, or who were this massive PR machine. I'm quoting the Columbia Journalism Review. They literally called it a PR machine. One of the writers there. Anyways, so the non-existence of the tunnels, the lack of child witnesses on the stand, and the supposed verifiability of the so-called false memory syndrome were the main points used to debunk McMartin and set up the idea of this mass hysteria, this wicked witch hunt. There's a law firm, Smith and Blythe, who invoked the supposed McMartin hysteria. Here's a direct quote. A situation involving false memories can easily occur in cases of criminal sexual conduct involving children, and the McMartin case makes that apparent. Through the use of expert testimony and by asking the proper questions of a complaining witness or witnesses, we can point out the common occurrence of false memory testimony, which can gravely help a defendant who has been accused of criminal sexual misconduct. Starting in the early 90s, there were a couple of doctors who were hired as experts for child custody cases all over the U.S. Mothers fighting to keep their children after child sex abuse allegations by fathers or stepfathers. And a lot of them, had pediatrician testimony showing physical evidence that the children had been sexually abused. Now, often the defense would hire Dr. Ralph Underweger, who is a member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, who is one of the founders of Vocal, the Victims of Child Abuse Laws, and who did an interview with the Dutch journal Pedagogue, which is a pro-pedophilia journal, talking about how, you can get closer to God by, sexual contact with children, and it's a beautiful thing. Now, to the FMSF's credit, or, honestly, they probably just did this to save their butts, and because of the possible blowback. They told him to disavow his statement, and he refused to because he said that there was no scientific evidence that child abuse was bad, that molestation was bad for kids. So child abuse is not abuse of a child, according to him. So they ousted him. And then there's also Dr. Richard Gardner, who with Parent Alienation Syndrome. This guy would charge around $2,000 for his testimony. The PAS theory, Gardner would claim that the mother, you've probably heard of the Oedipal complex. There's also something called the Medea complex, which is the opposite thing. But sort of similar to the Medea complex, only kind of reversed because it's the mother. The PAS theory is that the mothers were jealous of the father's affection for their child, and so they would make the kid, make up these false claims. Let's ignore that there's pediatricians who've shown direct physical evidence of sexual abuse. Dr. Gardner says that mommy is just jealous of daddy or stepdaddy. And, the PAS eventually was considered a crime in certain jurisdictions. In some cases, mothers were not only stripped of all custody rights, sometimes they were placed in prison. Can you imagine that? Like there's physical evidence that your child was sexually abused, and you've got the papers from your pediatrician, and now you can't speak to your kid again, and they're with their abuser, and you're going to prison because of Dr. Gardner and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. So these are the people who are responsible for this idea of the satanic panic, the satanic ritual abuse, witch hunt, the witch hunt narrative, as Chade calls it. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Now, there's so much more I could get into regarding some of the stuff that kind of relates to Dave McGowan's research and the connections between organized pedophilia, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and serial murder. Mark Dutroux, Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, all have been theorized by some credible sources, best-selling authors, and WGN in Chicago did the story about Gacy's human trafficking connection, the drug and human trafficking, as well as the serial killing. And in some of these cases, despite the serial killer myth that they're always lone wolves, the lone wolf theory is very often incorrect. I mean, there are so many cases, Leonard Lake and Charles Ohm, the Ripper Crew, Otis O'Toole, and Henry Lee Lucas, that's just a couple of cases. There's Dean Coral and his younger male companions. The Candyman and his friends. But yeah, so now in addition to Bynum and Judy Johnson's mysterious death before they could testify. By the way, some people point to Robert Henry Winkler, another death that could be tangentially connected to a babysitting and child abuse case. Now, there's also like the story of Frank Fuster in the Country Walk case, Gary Hambright at the Presidio, the Kellers at Friends Daycare in Austin, Texas, and all of these cases, medical evidence bore out the fact that there were sure signs of sexual abuse, and those weren't the only ones. But of course, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was incredibly successful in turning all those cases around, and they end up being noted by Debbie Nathan, another one of the major debunkers of the Satanic Panic and child abuse epidemic hysteria. She by the way is also in the New York Times Retro Report. But she mentions a lot of these cases where, despite the fact that the person went free, there was actual medical evidence of child abuse of these children. And but yeah, so in Debbie Nathan's book Satan's Silence, she purportedly debunks McMartin and several other related SRA, satanic ritual abuse cases. And, that kind of creates this situation where the idea of a moral panic with a root in right-wing politics and religious fundamentalism and people who just wanted to demonize daycare workers. That's, they've all got these ulterior motives, and they don't care about the kids, Now, oddly enough, Debbie Nathan mentions the Kellers case. In that case, there was a 3-year-old girl with severe lacerations of her hymen and other tears in her genital region, and that was testified to by the emergency room physician, Dr. Michael Mao, at Brackenridge Hospital. And as in so many other cases, multiple adults end up being indicted. Daniel Perry was one of the people implicated. He made a written statement to the investigators about a party where the Kellers and their friends were drinking, and several adults sexually abused a young girl and boy. And I'll spare you the graphic details, but apparently the type of abuse that was described was consistent with the injuries of the girl taken to the hospital, who also had trouble urinating due to the fresh cuts. And for whatever reason, Perry ended up recanting his confession before the trial. So the little girl's evidence was not entered. She was unable to speak about it. She would whisper to her sister, her older sister, in her ear. That's all she could do. She couldn't get on the stand. And Perry eventually, by the way, would plead guilty. The Kellers were convicted, but 2 other defendants were freed thanks to Perry's confession testimony involving the party being recanted. Now, I of course mentioned in my book how Debbie Nathan is praised by the pedo activist who goes only by Pariah, but who is likely connected to an organization that to this day works with underprivileged kids in the third world, BRRRR, health rights, WRIGHTS. One of the main guys there abused multiple little boys, many of them disabled. But anyways, then he went on to start a completely new charity where he could work with little kids. Anyways, Debbie Nathan was spoken of very highly by this guy Pariah, who is connected to some of the people involved in health rights. And, with the way she speaks about pedophilia, it's not surprising that would be the case. I wonder how many of the people involved in the child abuse skepticism community were actively shielding molesters knowingly, and how many were just maybe caught up in fighting what they perceived truly as a moral panic hysteria. We'll never know. I don't believe we'll ever know. Anyways, back to the Kellers, by the way. The Austin Chronicle claimed that the Kellers could be likely innocent, and said that Dr. Mao was mistaken about the multiple tears and laceration, based on when he was interviewed long after, and he said he wasn't sure. They used the "wasn't sure" part of the quote. When if you examine the entire quote that he made, he was saying that, well, I don't have the papers in front of me right now, so I can't be sure exactly. But yes, the initial the initial report was consistent with the type of abuse that Perry admitted to, and that the child showed signs of. Robert Halsey, Lanesboro Elementary School. Here's another case invoked by Debbie Nathan, Satan's Silence. Only in the intro, though, and beyond that, there's, all she does is basically mention that the case was a witch hunt, and refers to one solitary Boston Globe article, and then it's never mentioned again. But if you look at the trial transcript itself, yeah, there's actually a lot of evidence that it was not, in fact, a witch hunt. So yeah, Debbie Nathan, widely published skeptic of ritual abuse, had literally had laughed about Judy Johnson and how she's a psychotic, and how the kids were silly for thinking there were tunnels. Here's a direct quote from, she said that the area had been, quote, painstakingly probed for tunnels, and none were found. Well, that's just absolutely not the case. And we're going to look at that right here. So May of 1990, there was an archaeological project at the McMartin Preschool. Yes, it turns out they did find tunnels, and they were connecting separate classrooms. And there was an underground secret room, and there were turtle shells. The kids said that a turtle was killed. There were turtle shells and animal bones. And this is another interesting thing to me, by the way. Another thing that they like to do is they say, oh, well, you see what happened was there were neighbors in a house next to the preschool, and they had a garbage pit. So, it's Schrodinger's excuse. So it's like, so was there a tunnel and it was a garbage pit, or there wasn't any tunnel? Because the people who debunk McMartin, depending on who you ask and when you asked them, there's the two separate answers there. They found an opening large enough for human passage, including adults, eventually, but they brought in a geologist, they brought in a tree surgeon, they had an archaeologist, and they all went through this. And by the way, later, oddly enough, the tunnels ended up being refilled, but the soil sample showed that it wasn't the same soil that was there earlier. So it talk about cover up. No, they completely filled it in. I also find it very, very interesting that in the Finder's Cult Vault, once again, I have a whole chapter on the Finder's Cult in the Pedogate Primer book. There are a couple pages related to Gary Stickel's archaeological excavation and what he found. Let's jump towards the conclusions here. 2 extensive tunnel complexes beneath the concrete floor of the preschool building, consistent with the location and function described by the children, appeared to connect the interior of the preschool with adjoining triplex structure, had a distinct signature where it exited under the foundation of the east wall, lacked datable artifacts and a consistent demarcation of floor profile. It was classified conservatively as a possible tunnel. Then a tunnel feature with an identified entrance, linear and slightly curvilinear structure, architecture large enough for adult human passage, characteristic scars showing it had been dug by hand, compacted dirt floor, tunnel was not found open, had been completely artificially filled in with fill, which was distinguishable on the basis of color, texture, and compaction from the original soil deposit at the site. The fill contained inclusions in the form of a large number of artifacts, and probabilistic dating of the tunnel can be estimated by the recovered artifacts. So it was sometime after 1966 that this tunnel was dug out. Based on the expert testimony of Stickel, anyway. Which, by the way, I'll mention it again. This guy thought that the Buckeys were innocent until he started digging. That's when he was like, "Oh wait, hey, hold on, wait a minute." So the summation here. This report describes efforts of a group of parents to explore the meaning of several issues raised by their children after attending the McMartin Preschool. Reports of the existence of underground passageways had not been confirmed in the limited exploration conducted by the Office of the District Attorney. The first opportunity of private access to the preschool property, these parents secured permission from the new owner to search more extensively for pertinent information. By engaging a highly recommended professional archaeological team, they hope to bring scientific authority to whatever might be found, or a definitive resolution for whatever was not to be found. And, they use ground-penetrating radar and, the excavations, and the McMartin Tunnel Project confirms that a functional pattern of tunnels once existed under the McMartin Preschool, that the tunnels provided access outside the walls of the structure, that they must have been constructed after the structure was built in 1966, and that they were subsequently completely repacked with extraneous soil and implanted artifacts at some time prior to May 1990. While this project had no way of determining who dug these tunnels or for what purpose, the discoveries stand in stark contrast to the skeptical position that the children only imagined what they described as activities underground. If the stories of the children were bogus fantasies, there is no excuse for the tunnels discovered under the school. If there really were tunnels, there is no excuse for the glib dismissal of any and all of the complaints of the children and parents. And that's from UCLA Professor Gary E. Stickel, PhD. I've got a whole lot more. I've got a whole lot more related to the McMartin case and the so-called Satanic Panic, but we're already sitting on the 40-minute mark nearly, so I'll leave it at that for now, and be back soon with another installment related to the so-called Satanic Panic witch hunt narrative. The claims that it was just a moral panic, that there was no child abuse epidemic. But until then,
you're going to get penetrated by demons. You're going to get penetrated by demons.